Tokyo police enter a small apartment after tracing the digital footprint of a missing woman. They open the door and freeze. There are coolers and boxes stacked in the room. Inside them, body parts. 9 victims. 1 man. All connected through Twitter. He looked like just another quiet young man in the crowd, walking through the neon-lit streets of Tokyo with his hands in his pockets, head slightly down, eyes rarely meeting anyone else's. Nobody really noticed Takahiro Shiraishi. That was exactly how he liked it. He had always known how to blend in. Ever since childhood, he understood that being invisible made people trust you. And once they did, it became far too easy to get close. Takahiro wasn't born a monster. Or at least, that's what the people who knew him used to say. He grew up in a seemingly ordinary home in Zama City just outside Tokyo. He wasn't a top student, but he wasn't a troublemaker either. In school he was forgettable, never stood out, never caused problems. That anonymity followed him into adulthood. A few jobs here and there, nothing permanent. No big social circle. No deep attachments. But inside his mind, something darker had been growing. He had an interest in control, in the idea of manipulating people not just physically but emotionally. When he worked as a scout in the sex industry, he honed that skill to perfection. His job was to find vulnerable women, persuade them to join escort services, and convince them it was their decision. He learned how to identify pain. He learned how to listen without sounding dangerous. And most importantly, he learned how to speak the language of desperation. By 2017 he was no longer working openly. He had retreated into a quiet life in a small one-room apartment. But he wasn't alone. His new world was online. And his new playground was Twitter. He created anonymous accounts under names like Hanging Pro, usernames that suggested exactly what he was thinking. But instead of hiding behind threats or violent fantasies, he posed as a savior. He searched for people, mostly young women, who tweeted about wanting to die. People who had been ignored, bullied, or pushed to the edge. People crying out into the void for someone, anyone, to hear them. And he heard them. He would slide into their DMs and write things like, "If you're serious about ending your life, I can help you. I won't stop you. We can go together." At first, many didn't respond. But some did. And once the conversation began, it didn't take long for him to convince them that he understood them better than anyone else in the world. That he wasn't judging them. That he had even attempted suicide himself. That he didn't want to save them, only to make sure they didn't die alone. The messages were carefully crafted. He never rushed. He never pushed. He only offered understanding, comfort, and an open door. They came one by one. The first victim arrived in late August 2017. A teenage girl. She had been tweeting about feeling unwanted, about her depression, about disappearing. Her parents had tried to help, but she felt like no one really listened. And then, suddenly, a stranger did. She left home quietly, taking the train into Zama City. She never came back. Inside that small apartment, the walls were thin, the light was dim, and the air was always heavy with the smell of something chemical, something masked. She probably never even saw it coming. Shiraishi later said he strangled her quickly, without struggle. Afterward, he calmly dismembered her body in the bathroom, used cat litter to suppress the odor, and stored her remains in cooler boxes stacked inside the room. He didn't panic. He didn't feel guilt. Instead, he kept tweeting, searching, waiting. And then came the next victim. And the next. Over the span of just 3 months, he murdered 9 people, 8 women and 1 man. The man, it turned out, was the boyfriend of one of the victims. He had accompanied her out of suspicion, perhaps hoping to protect her. But he disappeared just like the others. Each killing followed a similar pattern. Strangle. Dismember. Store. Repeat. He kept everything inside that apartment. Police would later describe it as a house of horror. But to the neighbors, it was just another apartment on another quiet street. No one complained. No one noticed anything strange, aside from the occasional bad smell, which most chalked up to trash or poor sanitation. In Japan, people don't pry. Privacy is sacred even when it's dangerous. Inside, Shiraishi lived among the remains. He would go out, buy groceries, post on social media. All while body parts lay feet away in plastic containers. And the entire time he kept searching for more. His calm, calculated nature allowed him to slip through digital cracks, using his victims' pain as bait, knowing that once they stepped into his trap, no one would hear them scream. The police had no idea he existed, until one family refused to give up. One young woman had gone missing and her older brother became suspicious. He accessed her Twitter account and found her last interactions, private messages with a strange user. "Let's meet," the chat read. We'll go together. He shared the messages with police. Investigators traced the IP, found a location in Zama, and paid a visit to the apartment. Shiraishi answered the door oddly calm. When they asked about the missing woman, he didn't lie. He didn't fight. He simply pointed to the boxes inside and said, "They're in there. I killed them all." The officers were stunned. They hadn't even searched yet, and he was already confessing. What they found inside would horrify even the most hardened detectives. Heads, limbs, bloodstained tools. Everything catalogued, stored, and organized. Like trophies. The news exploded across Japan. How could something like this happen without anyone noticing? How could a man use Twitter, a platform for thoughts and emotions, as a weapon of death? And how many others might be doing the same thing right now? But for Shiraishi there was no remorse. In interviews he was disturbingly casual. He said he killed them because he could. Because they let him. Because they trusted him. The internet gave him access, but it was human vulnerability that gave him power. 9 lives gone. Silenced not just by violence, but by the twisted manipulation of a man who saw suffering, and chose to become its final destination. And the scariest part? They had all gone willingly. By the time his first few victims had vanished, the city barely noticed. In a country where silence is routine and privacy is sacred, it's easy for people to disappear, especially if they were already on the edge. 1 missing girl becomes a rumor. 2 missing girls become a coincidence. But when the number crept higher, so did the unease. Yet no one suspected that the truth was hiding in plain sight, in the timeline of Twitter itself. The social media platform had become a strange place by 2017. While many used it to connect, vent, and share lives in real time, there were corners of it that pulsed with darker energy, hashtags where people openly expressed suicidal thoughts, pleaded for help, or confessed that they no longer had the will to continue. These tweets rarely made headlines. Most were ignored, scrolled past, or dismissed as attention-seeking noise. But to Takahiro Shiraishi they were invitations. He wasn't the first to notice them, but he was one of the few who acted. He would scan posts late at night looking for patterns, certain keywords, familiar phrases. I want to die. Is there someone who will disappear with me? I can't take this anymore. These were not cries for attention. They were digital flares fired into the void hoping someone would see. And someone did. He created multiple accounts. Some presented him as a sympathetic listener, someone who had been there himself and made peace with the idea of death. Others were more suggestive, even playful, hinting at mutual pacts, romantic exits, and painless goodbyes. His usernames were sometimes as obvious as Hanging Pro, but no one reported him. No one flagged his DMs. Because the people he messaged didn't want rescue. They wanted understanding. Once they responded, he would listen, with patience, with eerie calm. He would mirror their pain, validate it. He didn't judge them, didn't preach, didn't offer therapy. He offered presence. And to someone drowning in their own silence, that was powerful. Then he made the offer. We can die together. You won't be alone. Most people ignored the suggestion. But for a few, the loneliness was louder than the alarm bells. And once they agreed to meet, there was no turning back. He didn't just kill them. He studied them. He planned each encounter. The victims ranged in age, some as young as teenagers, others in their early 20s. Most were women, though one was a man who had tried to protect his girlfriend. Each had tweeted about death in the days leading up to their disappearance. Each had left behind faint digital footprints, clues that were overlooked until it was too late. While families searched, police filed routine reports. Missing persons cases are not uncommon in urban Japan. People run away. They leave quietly. They come back. But the frequency of these vanishings and the eerie similarity in each victim's online behavior began to stir concern, especially among amateur investigators online. A few sharp-eyed Twitter users began noticing something others had missed. The victims all had interacted with a particular account shortly before disappearing. One account led to another. Then another. All tied together by similar language, similar phrasing, and, eventually, the same location. Behind the scenes, Shiraishi was methodical. His apartment in Zama City was small, sparsely furnished, and unassuming. But it had been transformed into something unimaginable. Inside were coolers and boxes filled with human remains, meticulously stored, arranged, and concealed with cat litter to mask the smell. At one point, there were reports of neighbors complaining about an odd odor. But nothing ever came of it. No one knocked on his door. No one questioned why a young man living alone received so many female visitors who were never seen again. He blended in, unnoticed. He continued to tweet, even as the killings escalated. Between August and October 2017, 9 people were murdered in that room. 9. In just over 2 months. Each time the method was the same: lure, trust, betrayal. Strangulation, dismemberment, silence. Then back to the screen, back to the search. When the final victim's brother decided to trace her digital activity, everything began to unravel. She had vanished without warning, but her Twitter remained active. He used her login, checked her DMs, and found messages from a man who said he could help her disappear. He alerted police, who followed the trail to Shiraishi's door. What they found inside stunned the nation. The coolers, the boxes, the tools, all of it was undeniable. But what chilled detectives even more was his demeanor. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He didn't lie. He confessed calmly, like a man reading a grocery list. He told them how he found his victims, how he convinced them to meet, how he killed them, and how he never felt remorse. Not even once. The news spread like wildfire. The headlines read, "Twitter killer caught." The details were grotesque. The public was horrified. But beneath the shock was a deeper fear, that something like this could happen so quietly, so easily, with a smartphone and a few private messages. People started digging into Twitter's dark side. Suicide support hashtags were flooded with concern. Helplines surged. Parents monitored their children's posts. Schools held mental health sessions. But for 9 families it was already too late. What made this case more disturbing wasn't just the brutality, it was the illusion of comfort he offered. These victims didn't run into danger. They walked toward it, believing they had found a companion. He didn't stalk them, didn't chase them, didn't attack them in public. He waited until they came to him, willingly. And that's what haunted the public. Not the image of the killer, but the thought that he had spoken to them the same way he might have spoken to anyone else. That, hidden among the thousands of tweets every day, someone like him could be watching. Waiting. In the aftermath, Japan faced a harsh question. How do you protect people who don't want protection? How do you save those who are searching for an end? There were no easy answers. Only silence. The kind of silence that settles after you scroll past a tweet, not knowing that it may be someone's final words. When Takahiro Shiraishi was finally brought into custody, the entire nation of Japan held its breath. In a country known for its low crime rate and quiet order, the idea that a man could murder 9 people in the span of just a few weeks, and keep their remains hidden inside a one-room apartment, was almost unthinkable. Even more terrifying was how calm he remained. Not just at the time of his arrest, but in every appearance that followed. He didn't deny anything. Not a single murder. Not the dismemberment. Not the luring, the messages, the methods. In fact, he confessed before the police even asked. "I killed them all," he said plainly. "There are 9. No excuses. No justifications." But what followed was far more disturbing than denial ever could have been. As investigators began interrogating him, it became clear that Shiraishi didn't see himself as a monster. He described his crimes as logical, even merciful in his own twisted framework. He believed, or wanted others to believe, that he was doing the victims a favor. That he was ending the suffering of people who already wanted to die. That he was simply fulfilling their wishes. But the evidence told a different story. As the police pieced together digital messages, travel records, and forensic details, they began to uncover a pattern of manipulation far more calculated than Shiraishi admitted. Many of the victims had not, in fact, agreed to die. Some expressed doubts. Others asked if it could wait. A few simply said they were feeling lost or overwhelmed. But he used their vulnerability as leverage. He didn't just invite them, he exploited them. He promised peace. He delivered terror. The public followed the case with a mix of fascination and horror. News outlets flooded the airwaves with updates. The now infamous photo of Shiraishi, pale, unsmiling, eyes heavy with indifference, became a national symbol of dread. Some called him the Twitter butcher. Others, the apt killer of Zama. But most chilling of all was the nickname that stuck. The Twitter killer, a reminder that this wasn't a story from the past. It was something that had unfolded live, right in front of the public's eyes, in tweets and hashtags and messages that anyone could have seen. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed with journalists, families of victims, legal experts, and silent observers who wanted answers. Shiraishi showed no signs of remorse. He didn't cry. He didn't plead. He didn't even shift uncomfortably in his seat. He listened as the charges were read. 9 counts of murder, 1 for each of the victims whose bodies were discovered in his apartment. His defense team initially tried to argue that the killings were consensual, that Shiraishi had acted at the request of the victims. that they wanted to die and he merely helped them. But prosecutors brought forward evidence that shattered that claim. Screenshots of messages showed that several victims had hesitated. Some had clearly asked to delay their meetings. Others expressed uncertainty. And one, the man who came looking for his girlfriend, had been lured under false pretenses. Shiraishi at one point dropped the charade. "It wasn't about helping them," he said during questioning. "I did it for my own satisfaction. Killing was the only way I could feel anything." It was the closest thing to honesty he had ever uttered. Cold. Stripped of any illusion. A quiet, soul-free admission of evil. The families of the victims sat silently during the testimony. They did not weep loudly. They did not scream. But the pain was everywhere, in the clenched jaws, the tightly held hands, the eyes fixed on a man who had stolen the lives of their daughters, their sisters, their friends. One mother later told the press, "He didn't kill someone who wanted to die. He killed someone who wanted to be heard." The judge listened. Carefully. Painstakingly. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no question of guilt. The only question was what justice could look like in a case so saturated in cruelty. On December 15, 2020, the verdict was delivered. Guilty. All 9 counts. The sentence, death by hanging, Japan's ultimate punishment. There was no drama. No gasps. Just the cold, final statement of law. Shiraishi didn't flinch. He didn't protest. In his final remarks to the court, he simply said, "I accept the sentence." As if it meant nothing. But outside the courtroom the case sparked something bigger. The public demanded more than a sentence. They demanded answers. How did a man with a Twitter account and a phone manage to murder 9 people in one of the most surveilled countries in the world? How had no one noticed? And more importantly, how could it be prevented from happening again? The Japanese government responded. New conversations emerged around mental health, suicide prevention, and digital accountability. Twitter, under immense pressure, changed its approach to suicide-related content in Japan, increasing monitoring and flagging mechanisms for users expressing dangerous thoughts. Organizations started offering help and hotlines to those who posted about wanting to die, even if they hadn't asked for it directly. And yet, there was something darker that lingered. Some people began idolizing Shiraishi in twisted online forums. Others claimed he was misunderstood. His image, cold and emotionless, became a meme in certain digital subcultures. Even after being sentenced to death, his name continued to echo through the very network he once used as a weapon. As of now, he remains on death row. In Japan, executions are carried out without warning. Prisoners are told the morning of, sometimes just minutes before. No appeals. No countdown. Just silence, then the end. Until then, Takahiro Shiraishi sits in a concrete cell, waiting. But the fear he created hasn't died. Because long after the court adjourned, long after the reporters left, long after the hashtags stopped trending, people still wonder, what if someone else is watching now? What if another account like his is already out there, sending messages, offering understanding, making promises? And what if, once again, no one notices, until it's too late?